Hi, and welcome to Kitchen Chats with Aimee Kandrac. Today, I am here with my good friend, Ali Cudby, who unfortunately can't be in my kitchen with me, but has been in my kitchen with me before. And we are going to talk about helping friends from far away and helping loved ones when you can't be there physically. And Ali is now no longer in Indianapolis and in Boston, so that's why she can't be sitting in my kitchen with me right now. But thanks for joining me today, Ali.
I am always happy to have an opportunity to talk to you. And I guess it's kind of apropos that I am long distance since we're talking about long distance stuff.
Isn't it? Isn't it? So, to get started, Ali, as a reminder to all of our listeners, we're in the kitchen because when major life events happen, you call your friends, and I usually sit in my kitchen if I'm on the phone, or if they're in person, we gather in the kitchen and we talk about whatever the hell is going on and how we're going to figure shit out. And I am wondering, Ali, if you have any moment like that in your life that you're willing to share.
For sure. And so it's interesting because my my friend group has always been not local to me. So my closest friends, the people that I tend to call when I am facing the hardest things, and I mean my friends and not my husband, but they're all over the country, and for a while we're all over the world. And so this idea, we don't tend to do Zoom. But it's a phone call, it's a WhatsApp group. It's not I don't get to sit down in my kitchen. And when I was thinking about coming on here, there was a part of me that was actually a little jealous, thinking, oh, that sounds so much nicer and more comforting and more supportive than having to be like, okay, but is this a good time? Like, okay, you're sending your kid to band practice, so let's talk between drum solos, that kind of thing. But I can for sure remember a time when my dad his health was failing, and he was in the emergency room, I believe. And I left the emergency room to go to my kids' school to deal with a crisis. And they were both in crisis at the same time.
Because
and I was
that's
literally
always how it is.
sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Always.
so I was literally pinging between, the principal's office and the ER, and called my friend and just was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And oh, by the way, was running a company simultaneously.
Right. Of course.
Sure.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, for me it's having those friends to talk to and be able to say the hard things, that aren't always the socially acceptable things or the pretty things or
Right.
the things that you would ever put on any kind of social media, because first of all, you would never want that sentiment to live in the long term.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you do not want that memory popping up sometimes.
No, or living forward at all. Sometimes you just have to say things that aren't pretty and just kind of get them out. Yeah. And there's no version of that needs to live beyond that moment in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So I can clearly remember talking to this one friend who is one of my go-to friends in crisis, and just needing to be validated that what I was going through was really hard, because there's no version of it where you get to not do it, because women just do these things, right?
Yeah.
Like, you just pick up the slack and you just make your way through.
There is no scenario where you could have just said, oh, sorry, principal, I'm not coming to deal with my kids. Oh, sorry, dad, you're in the ER. I'm not going to be able to handle that right now.
Right.
I mean, I shouldn't say there's no scenario, but like these are not things that you can just say, oh, you know what, I can get to that later. Like going to the grocery, I probably wouldn't get done for a while after that. But
when I think about it, I'm a step parent. I technically didn't have to be the person who was at that school meeting. And my mom is still with us. And so clearly was at the time. And it's just that for whatever reason, I was the one who was on the front lines in both scenarios. And that's part of all of this too, right? Sometimes you just have to step into the role, even though technically somebody else could have done it.
but did you? But like you wanted to too, right? Like not that you wanted to have that responsibility, not that you wanted to have to deal with whatever hard conversations were being had both locations, but you also didn't want to not be involved with these major life things.
Yes, I chose it. I for sure chose it.
Right.
And so no, it was not being foisted on me. But I would also still argue that those things, that I was the right person to be in both of those situations, and
right,
for reasons.
Of course. Of course.
Maybe one of those reasons being that I'm a tiny bit of a control freak sometimes. But that's a different podcast.
That might be why we're friends. I mean, maybe not, but maybe.
Just a bonus.
Just a bonus. Like people joining together as friends.
Right.
Well, I didn't even know that part. And you were physically able to be there for both of those things. But when I thought about having you on to discuss this, you have two other really big things that you manage from far away, and have had the opportunity to help with and see some positive outcomes for. So do you want to share either and or both of those and how you've managed?
Sure. So, I mean, so you mean my mom and my brother, right?
I do mean your mom and your brother. Mm-hmm.
I was trying to think what else I had. I mean, those are big. But.
So those are pretty big. And sorry, I didn't mean to. Maybe I should start this over and say, so when I was thinking about having you on in your life that I have known you and you've shared with me, your mom has lived far away from you for many, many years and has needed constant care. Mm-hmm. And you have been managing that. And it's not been easy. And even more recently, your brother lived on the West Coast and was diagnosed with, was it during COVID?
Yeah.
Yeah. During COVID was diagnosed with
an illness.
And it's really hard to do that from far away and show your support.
Yeah. So we went sort of from my father's long epic illness into my mom's long epic illness. And at the time I was still living in DC and she was declining. And right around the time that she needed full-time care, we left DC, which was hard, was really hard. And, had to do a lot of self-talk to come around to a place where I felt okay doing that. Because it didn't feel good. It didn't feel like being a good daughter. And in the years since, her health just keeps declining and it's only going to go in one direction. And it is hard, and then COVID made it harder. So, at least in the beginning, I was visiting her once a quarter. And over those years, she kind of was less able to notice when that I was or was not visiting. And then during COVID, I couldn't visit. And that was sort of in some ways hard, and in some ways, honestly, like having it out of my hands, like I can't go visit her. It was some it was a relief in some ways, like, oh, because it's not fun visiting my mother. It's not a fun experience. And in fact, I saw her recently, and it was the first time she didn't recognize me. And, like, as much as I knew that would happen, yeah, it's brutal.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm really sad.
It's part of life. It's part of life. And it's a sucky part of life, but this is the hand that sort of she's been dealt, and I've been dealt. And
but even without visiting her, you have still had contact.
Oh yeah.
And had to manage her care.
Yes, and it's complicated. It's complicated because there are just so many different facets of life that have to be managed, and it's all long distance. So it's the physical, like, it's managing her aides, and managing her aides is different from managing her doctors, and managing her aides and her doctors is different from managing, like, the environment of her apartment, and making sure she has what she needs and is safe, and can get groceries, and
somebody's taking care of her dog.
The dog is no longer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So that was also another complicating factor. The dog, who, had never gotten housebroken, and of course nobody was taking care of the dog because it was just that was awful. And so yeah, it's like there's no joy in Mudville there. And the best you get is a moment of recognition, a moment of connection when I see her. And it's like, these are just the realities that people go through now. And I'm incredibly fortunate that my mom has the financial flexibility to have the support that she needs. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I am always aware of that. Money may not be able to buy you happiness, but boy, it can buy a lot of support. And, but then for everything that you do to support her, for everything I do to support her, it also comes with a side dish of guilt that I'm not there doing it in person. So there's that part too. And then, then this past year, when my brother was also ill, I spent a lot more time going out to visit him and help there. And I was happy to do it. I truly wanted to be able to support him and his family in any way that I could, and was able to step in when I was needed. And that my brother is one of the most important people in my life. And so that was incredibly meaningful for me to make a contribution. But it also meant that in my limited capacity to not be here, or not be where I live and work, I was going to see him and not my mom. And so that was also, whatever, like, also challenging. Oh, look, my dog has joined us.
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
Because that's what dogs do.
Yeah. She likes the background of,
yeah. Well, that's fine. I had a cat jumping in the window of one of the podcasts a few weeks ago. It was pretty funny. Mm-hmm.
Because that's all part of life too.
That's part of life. That happens in my kitchen. It happens in your bedroom. That is how the world works. And
yeah. And it's part of, like, you sit there and you look at this sort of photoshopped existence that people have sometimes, and you think about how not helpful it is. And, like, just life is messy.
Life is really messy. Life is really messy. And I'm sorry, I didn't realize your mom's dog was no longer with you, but I can remember really clearly one time when you and I were talking, and you were struggling so much because the dog was not housebroken, and the aides didn't want to have to deal with the dog at the same time as your mom. But you weren't there, and going to see her was a 10-hour trip one way. And the dog, what were you going to do? You know? And the dog was important to your mom.
Yeah. 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 And so what did we do? Again, like the luxury of being able to solve the problem with financial resources. So, we hired a dog walker, and the dog walker came, I think at one point, like 3 times a day, because that was the only way that the dog was going to get exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I don't think that that is fair or right for the dog. I feel like, it isn't, that's not that. I felt sad for that dog the whole time, but the dog did bring a lot of joy and love to my mom, and my mom loved that dog.
Loved that dog. Well,
So
so maybe it wasn't fair or right for the dog, but you did what you had to do, right?
yeah.
Like, and that was the best option. I know we have an older relative who likes to spend her winters in warmer weather, and she has a dog who is her entire life, but she can't get out to walk the dog every day. And we found a dog walking service that was really reasonably priced, and she has the financial means to pay for this dog walker. But the other thing that for us has been really nice is they can check in on her 3 times a day,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like when they go in at 7:30 in the morning to walk the dog, we know that she's there and she's
Yeah.
okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if for some reason, it's just like that one more point of check-in. So for you, I know you had more aides there, but for us, it is a super nice way to have that regular check-in. And if for some reason something did happen to our relative while she was far away, the dog walker has our contact info and can let us know. And just one more, especially for some older people, I think it's a really nice. I think the dog walkers fill more than one role.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's always just another set of eyes on things. And even in the realm of, you have somebody who's older who may not really be paying attention to the dog's health in the same way, or clued in the same way.
Yes.
It's like, yes, you have the benefit of having another person coming in and checking on the human, but it's also a nice check and balance to make sure that the dog is getting the care that they need beyond just being walked.
Exactly. Oh, I didn't. Yeah, that's huge. I've just been, gosh, selfishly thinking, oh, okay, at least we know that 2 or 3 times a day she's getting checked in on. And if she doesn't get out of bed for multiple days, we'll find out and can do another check-in, because she doesn't like to be checked in on by her family all the time, right?
Yeah,
Even if you are far
got
away.
a lot going on too. I mean, you're neck deep in all of these complexities of caregiving.
Right. Well, so we were talking about how the challenge for when you went out to help your brother and you didn't have the opportunity to go visit your mom. But one thing is that you did have the opportunity to go and spend time with your niece.
Yes.
Right. And I think there's something special about that time that you get to spend coming in as the new person, right? And not the new person, because you've been in her life her whole life, but a new face into the scenario.
Well, and sometimes the fact that you haven't been as present can be helpful, because my niece and my nephew know that I'm family, but also that they can talk to me, and that I'm not always there. And sometimes it's helpful to have that friend or that person to talk to who isn't, who's a little bit outside the circle. And I don't know. I mean, they're teenagers, and so it's hard to read them sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the balance of being there for them and also giving them space is one that no parent or aunt ever feels like they got right. And there were times when I wanted for there to be, more moments of connection. And then there were moments when I felt like, oh, I'm giving them what they need right now by giving them space. So you got to take yourself out of the equation a little bit too, and sort of just think about what is it that they need.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that you touched on is you're a new face into this not every day. And I think that is a really hard balance because you come in and you know how they used to function, and you haven't seen necessarily the everyday progression of to where they're functioning currently. And it can get really hard to, like, one, you don't know what you're jumping into. Because even though you're talking to somebody every day, if you don't see, oh, everything's fine, and then you walk in and actually, like, the sink is full of dishes and they haven't gotten who knows what done, it's hard to know where to jump in and then where you can really be helpful.
Right. Yeah, especially when it comes to times of crisis, it's hard to know when to, I guess, sort of push them to talk about what they're thinking and how they're feeling, and when what they really need is the autonomy to say, I don't want to talk about it right now. And at the point where I visited, they had a lot of people coming in to sort of visit and help, and there had been a rotation of just a lot of people. And my read on it was that they were processing an emotional moment and needed some more space. And so I came to visit and I was like all charged up, I had my whatever Superman cape on, like, here I come to save the day. And like they didn't really want that in that moment. And my take was, oh, they need space and quiet to process this more than they need to talk about it right now. I think that there had been a lot of people that wanted to help them talk about it, and so I didn't. And then of course, whatever, like, you sit there and you're like, did I do the right thing? Should I have, what does this mean?
Well, and sometimes it's just now occurring to me, sometimes it's kind of nice to be like, no, we don't need you to bring us any food right now because we have someone staying with us and they're our live-in helper for the moment. So we can actually, you maybe allowed them to have more space because you were there.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, I think that they actually paused their meal delivery, their friend meal delivery time, when I was there. And so, and so it worked out great. We found, I like cooking, and we found meals that worked, and it was one more thing for us to do.
Yeah. Well, it's making me think of different times. So when you aren't there, right? There are things that I know I have lots of friends who have had things happen when I can't physically be in town to help them. And because food is always the number one thing, people are like, I'm going to bring you lasagna. I, like, in the pre-DoorDash Uber Eats days, would call restaurants and order food to have delivered. And I, like, just give them my credit card number and have that as a special delivery for them. Now everybody can just get DoorDash. I mean, not everybody can. But sending a DoorDash, I think, is helpful also, because I think that is a nice way, again, to provide some space, but also to say, I'm thinking of you. But even if you're in town, just to be like, let me just DoorDash that for you.
Again, I think it's like, it's this balance, right? I can remember when this is going back a few years, when my dad was sick. My mom was getting food from her friends every day. And each friend, my mom was, alone in the house, and each friend would send a meal for like a whole meal.
All of it for 5
All
people.
of it, at least 5. And it would be, like appetizer, entree, sides, and a dessert, like every night. And I was working. I was taking care of my dad. I was actually sort of because my mom's illness had sort of kicked in at that point, I was sort of the lead person talking to all the doctors, and coming home at night and caring for my family. And I said to my mom at one point, so my dad was in the hospital, my mom was getting all this food. I was like, can I just bring some of this food home and like have it for dinner, because I'm exhausted. And
yes.
And yeah, my mom said, no.
What?
My friend sent this food for me. I was like, okay then. And that was her coping mechanism. Like, that was like her way of feeling like she was being cared for, and it wasn't important enough to make it a thing. Except for that it is, 12 years later and I'm still talking about it. But I was really not happy about that. Like, lady, she was throwing the food away by the truckload, right? Because she couldn't possibly eat all. That wasn't her best moment.
It wasn't her best moment, but I think you bring up a really good point. That is, you weren't the spouse, but you really were kind of the primary role in this, right? Like the primary caregiver in all of this. But I don't think that we always remember how much the secondary person needs support. And if her friends had realized, one, that all that food was being thrown away, and 2, that you weren't getting that, I bet they would have been mortified and changed course and sent food to you and Joe and the kids.
I had friends that were saying, like, what can I do? How can I be supportive? And I mean, you can't say. And then I had one friend, Gish, if you're listening to this, and she didn't say, what can I do? She said, I'm bringing dinner on Thursday. And she brought dinner, and she brought enough that it was dinner and it was lunch and a couple of lunches. And, she is one of my best friends from elementary school. And I have lived in lots of places all over the world since I was in elementary school. And she has always been such a good friend, and always an incredibly, incredibly thoughtful friend. And when I think about my lessons learned during that time, part of it is, don't ask someone if you can send dinner or be helpful or whatever. Like, tell them that you're going to help, and then let them say no if they want to. But don't say, what can I do? Say, I'm going to send dinner. Would you like it on Tuesday or Thursday? Or would you like it a different day? And would you like Italian or a salad? Like, it's almost, I mean, I don't have a fully fleshed out vision for how this all works. But what occurs to me, as I just said it just now, is like, maybe it's a little bit like talking to a toddler when you have people that are in grief mm-hmm. or in like massive stress. It's like, I'm going to give you choices and I'm okay with either one. Are you going to wear your pink dress or your blue dress?
Well, it's because you need that best friend from elementary school who can say, Allie, I love you. I know that you need stuff right now. You can't see it because you have so much going on. But I am going to support you because that's what friends do. And that's what we do when we love each other. And I talk to people about this a lot and say that it's never the person who's going through it who can organize help. because they can't verbalize it. It is so hard to actually say what you need and how and when you need it. And not always. Some people are better at it than others. But if somebody can be the best friend to say, I see where the holes are, and I know you well enough and love you well enough to know where we can support you, I think that makes it a lot better.
Yeah, I don't even, if I think back to where my head was at that point, I wouldn't have even said it was a hole, because I was just in get it done mode, and it was so intense all the time. And so of course I would have gotten dinner on the table. If Gish hadn't showed up with dinner, of course I would have gotten dinner on the table.
Yes, of course you would have. Yes.
And so I would have handled it, whatever it was. And so it's not like I was sitting there saying, oh, I need this, or, oh, there's a gap. It's just, but when she saw through everything that I had on my plate, mm-hmm. and said, I'm just going to take it on myself to take this one thing off your plate right now. Like, I'm just going to take this one meal off your plate right now. I was really touched by it. And absolutely, if I had said to any of a dozen friends who offered, like, yeah, you know what, a meal would actually be great.
But that's not what you do.
I couldn't say it, because then that would have, part of what was holding me together was the idea that I was like, had it all under control. So having to ask would have, I think that would have popped the balloon in some ways.
Probably, because it was probably gave you enough time to sit down and breathe also, that it can sometimes just stop the momentum.
Yeah, sometimes like you think, oh, if only I had a day. But really, you need to not have a day, mm-hmm. in the crisis. Like, I just need to like put my head down and get through it.
The only way through it is through it sometimes.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, thinking about any other like tips or life hacks that you have learned, because you have done this at, hundreds, thousands of miles away, being able to support people really close to you multiple times.
I guess things that have been meaningful to me as I've made my way through is finding space to connect with people individually, when I can. I'm sometimes I'm not always a good keeper and toucher. And I tend to deal with what's on my plate, mm-hmm. and there tends to be a lot on my plate. And so when I think about reaching out to my niece and nephew, I do feel like, oh, I wish I did more of that. And I wish I had spent more. So when I did get out to visit, I tried to find those moments where I would just have time with them. And that's something I've always done. When I go to visit them, I do try and find those moments where it's just me and my niece, or just me and my nephew. And so I tried to do that. Yeah. So that's one thing that has been meaningful, is to try and find those moments of connection. And then I have learned from that time that Gish showed up for me. Mm-hmm. And I don't always do it by sending a meal, but I do make a point of checking in. I'm at an age now where I do have, like, my friends are going through it. I just happen to go through it a little bit early. And so now they're going through it with their kids and their parents. And so I do know sort of what they're dealing with. And I do make a point of, sometimes it's just checking in and remembering that the crisis is still happening, even when it's not the moment of drama. Mm-hmm. And
yeah.
having been through it, people just are on to the next thing. So the moment that you go into the ER, it's like, oh my God, is everything okay? And then 6 days later, like you're still dealing with the fallout.
Yeah.
But everybody else is back to their normal lives. And so just trying to remember that there's still emotional fragility there that needs some TLC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And especially when they're not right next door or you're not driving past, it's out of sight, out of mind. And so keeping those people in mind is really, really helpful. So I think you've just answered, but because I always ask these final two questions, I'm going to ask anyway. What is your favorite thing to do? Like, what is your go-to thing when you find out someone you care about has a major life event?
So it is sort of to check in, not just when it happens, but to keep checking in and to fling the support message without any expectation of anything back. One of the things I remember so clearly was the number of times that somebody would call to be supportive, and then either I would end up supporting them in their story of grief, and I'd be like, oh, that sounds really hard for you, and then I was sitting there and I would make a game of it, and I would actually find it to be pretty amusing. How many times that happened?
Oh, probably most.
Most. So just also people who would reach out, and what they would want is information, and like, no, tell me what's happening. And that's not always supportive. So my go-to move is to just give the love and support and say, here whenever, I'm always here to talk, I'm always here for whatever, but just I'm thinking of you, and with no expectation of anything on their part. That's my go-to move, I think.
I can say that there have been even little things that have happened to me, and you've done that, and I really appreciate it. You are very good at that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And then the final question is, in all of your experiences, what is, and again, I think you maybe answered it, but what is the best thing anyone's ever done to support you?
That meal really stood out for me. I think it came at a moment where I was just at the end of my rope. So I'll go with that. I know that there are other things, and my husband has been an incredible source of support. I know we're talking about friends for the most part, but he truly has been there. He's seen a lot, and he has just been pretty awesome. But in terms of those moments in time that somebody has sort of stepped up to do something that was a small gesture that made a big difference, Gish.
Oh. Well, Ali, thank you so much for sharing your stories and all that you have done to support me and other people in your life. So thanks so much.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Mm-hmm.